Hi 8th grade, this is Miss B here with lesson 4.02, and our I-CAN for today is I can solve multi-step algebraic equations. So over the past few days, we've been simplifying what are known as algebraic expressions. And an algebraic expression has variables, constants, and coefficients, just like we see on the left-hand side here. The only difference between an expression and an equation is this equal sign, which is where we get this first part of our word. So while in an expression we are just simplifying, in an equation we are actually solving and trying to get the variable by itself. So we're trying to figure out what the actual value of x is. So the first type of equations that you first learned were one-step equations, where it only took you one inverse operation, which means opposite operation, to get to your answer. So if we look at the first example where we have y plus 14 equals 20, there's only one number that we can add to 14 that's going to give us 20. So when we take these steps with the inverse operations, we're doing the same thing on both sides to try to get the variable by itself. So if we're trying to get y by itself, we're going to be subtracting 14 on both sides, which will cancel out. But if we're subtracting 14 on the left, we must also subtract 14 on the right. And that's what leaves us with y equals 6. And if we were to check back our work, we would have 6 plus 14 equals 20, and 20 is equal to 20. We have a true statement, so we know that we've solved correctly. So on the right-hand side, we have an example where our inverse operation would be division. Since we have 3 times the number is equal to 12, we would have to divide by 3 on both sides to get the unknown. So n is equal to 4 because the only number times 3 that gives us 12 is 4. The next type of equations that you studied as you were learning algebra were two-step equations. With two-step equations, it takes 2 steps to get to the answer. It takes 2 steps for us to isolate our variable. So in this example, we have 3k minus 2 is equal to 10. And if we're using inverse operations, addition and subtraction come before multiplication and division. So your first step is to get rid of your constants on the same side of your variable. So in order to get one step closer to having k by itself on the left-hand side, we're going to eliminate the negative 2 by adding 2 on both sides. So this cancels out on the left, and since we're adding 2 on the left, we also add 2 on the right. And 10 plus 2 gives us this 12. So you bring down the terms that you have left, which is 3k equals 12. And now our final inverse operation, since we have 3 times k, we are going to divide by divide by 3 on both sides. And we're left with 12 divided by 3, which is equal to 4. Notice how the work shown is in this example is shown very linearly, right? Everything, every change that's made in the line before, everything's just neatly organized. So that's one thing that you want to do while you're solving your equations so that you don't leave any values out. Because the type of equations that we're going to be studying today are multi-step equations. So we're going to have to do some combining like terms, some distributive property. So even though it might look really long and scary, we're just applying what we learned over the past few days on simplifying algebraic expressions to solve these equations. So don't feel intimidated and don't feel overwhelmed with the amount of work that we have for today. You're not expected to get the whole thing, just practice makes perfect. So whatever is not completed in class will be done for homework, and you have the weekend to work on that. So let's take a look at some examples before you practice on your own. The first example that we have to look at together has distributive property. And we know we're using distributive property since we have a set of parentheses that we must eliminate before we add and subtract, multiply and divide, whatever operation we need to do. So one thing I suggest doing is drawing a line going down the middle of your equal sign. right? We're thinking of an equation as a balance beam. And whatever we do to one side, we must do to the other. So the first thing we're going to do is distribute positive 2, and when you're distributing, you're multiplying the 2 to each term on the inside. So we have 6x plus 8 is equal to 20. So now this is just turned into a two-step equation, and we are one step closer to getting x. So the first thing I want to do is eliminate my constants. So my constant in this case is 8. I'm going to subtract 8 on both sides and bring down the terms that I have left. So I only have a 6x on the left, and 20 minus 8 gives me 12. And finally, since we have 6 times x, the inverse operation of multiplication is division. So we are going to divide by 6 on both sides. So x is equal to 12 divided by 6, which is 2. Don't be intimidated by example 2. We have some extra steps to take here, but we're applying whatever we learned over the past few days and over the summer, because we spent some time working on these over the summer, to solve for the variable in this example. So I'm going to draw my line going down my equal sign so I can be sure to keep the left side separate from the right as I'm simplifying. So I'm going to look at each side separately. So right now we are ignoring the right-hand side of the equation. Pretend it's not there, and all we need to do is simplify this expression. So I see a set of parentheses, and I know I'm going to have to apply the distributive property. The only term that I'm distributing is this negative 6. So I'm not doing anything with the 12 just yet. We have negative 6 times 2x, which is negative 12x, and negative 6 times negative 10, which is positive 60. So now that I've simplified the left-hand side, I'm going to go on ahead and see what I can simplify on the right. On the right-hand side, I don't have any parentheses, but I do see two like terms that I can combine. Negative 20x plus 6x gives us a negative 14x. And don't forget the minus 30. So remember, whatever sign is in front of that number stays with that number. So now, if you look back at the left-hand side, we have our constants that we could have combined in one shot, but it's okay to do it in separate steps. So I have positive 12 plus 60, which gives me a 72, and I have a minus 12x. And that's still equal to negative 14x minus 30. Don't get lazy and copy down the entire equation. So our next step is to start combining our variables by bringing them on opposite sides of the equation. So in order to avoid dividing or multiplying by negative coefficients, one trick to use is to always start with a smaller coefficient. So in this case, we're looking at negative 12x and negative 14x. Which of these values has the smaller, or which of these terms, I should say, which of these terms has the smaller coefficient? Negative 14x. Negative 14 is further to the left on our number line. It's a smaller value. So I'm going to add 14x on both sides. So we're going to bring down everything we have left. So we have 72, negative 12x plus 14x is positive 2x, and that's equal to, this is going to turn to 0, and all we're left with is negative 30. So now that I have my variable on the left side of my equation, there it is, I'm going to bring my constants to the right side. The only constant that we have on the left side is 72. Right? So in order to take 72 away to the right, we're going to subtract 72 on both sides. So now this turns to 0. And once again, we're going to bring down what we have left. So 2x is equal to negative 30 and negative 72 gives us negative 102. And we have just one more step to get to our answer. We have 2 times x equals 102. The inverse of multiplication is division, so we need to divide by 2 on both sides to get x by itself. I'm going to write my final answer here since I don't have any more space. So on the left, we're left with x. And on the right, negative 102 divided by 2 is negative 51. And that's it. Take some time to answer examples 1 and 2 on your own and unpause this video for a step-by-step solution. Okay, so here are the solutions to example 1 and 2. Again, we're starting with the smaller coefficient to avoid negatives. And in example 1, we are subtracting 2x on both sides. So our last step is to divide by 2, which gives us x is equal to 8. On the right-hand side, again, we have variables on both sides of the equation. So our first step is to combine those variables. Your next step after you've combined the variables is to combine the constants, which is what you see here, subtracting 20 on both sides. And lastly, we are going to divide by our coefficient to get our variable by itself. And we have x is equal to 3. So again, don't feel discouraged by the equations that you're working with today. Just be very, very careful in the steps that you're taking and show all of your work. Have a great weekend.